Hello and welcome everyone to our live session today. My name is Scott Schroeder, SVP of Yield here at Playwire. And today I'm joined by people smarter than myself. Our first guest is Ashley Wheeler. Ashley, would you like to say hello?
Yes. Hey, everybody. I'm Ashley Wheeler. I oversee the supply side of our DV Plus platform at Magnite.
And we also have Myles Engler.
Hello, everyone. I'm Myles. I'm a VP of Yield here at Playwire, focused on publisher operations.
And the topic du jour today will be Myles, Ashley, and I are going to discuss some major trends that we're noticing in 2024. We're going to have a casual conversation around that. And then we're also going to speak about how publishers can best manage these trends that we're seeing to not only protect, but also grow their revenue. So without further ado, we have a couple topics we want to dive into. The first topic today will be the general trend of eCPM degradation. Ashley, what do you think? Start with you. From a platform perspective, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing when it comes to display and online video CPMs?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the benefits of working at an SSP is you kind of get to see all of these trends in aggregate and start to normalize them and understand a little bit about what's driving them. And I will say, like, one of the prevailing things that we've seen, not just recently, but really over the last couple of years, has been this sort of gradual degradation of CPMs. And it's kind of played out in a couple of different ways. Like the most noticeable ones is there's just a bunch of DSPs that have been very upfront about the fact that they use floors as guides now, right? They bid below floors, they take them as, advice, but they don't really follow them. And there's probably a lot of different factors that are driving that change. Like, buyers are increasingly looking for efficiency, and that's always going to be the case. I also think there's just a lot of noise in the ecosystem. So there's a surplus of supply. A lot of it's great, but some of it's not as great. And I think buyers are sort of building that into pricing decisions, particularly when they're looking for specific audiences. I also think there's just some systemic complexities that make it really difficult for publishers to manage floors. So if you think about flooring strategies, and GAM UPRs don't talk to pre-bid. And sometimes, depending on how complex your flooring strategy is, it's difficult to go in and maintain that and maintain consistently across all your partners. So I definitely think that complexity adds to some of this, but overall, we've definitely seen this play out where over the last few years, display and video CPM specifically have sort of been on this downward trajectory. I mean, have you seen that from the pub side?
Yeah, Myles, what do you think about our CPM trends that we've seen?
Yeah, so that's a great question. CPMs in general for us this year have been growing quite heavily, actually, particularly on the display side. But that's the result of a very specific quality initiative that we went through. So I think, Ashley, to your sort of previous point, the industry from the buy side feels like it's gearing up to really transact on this concept of efficiency, which has not historically been sort of the primary method with which buyers and sellers introduce themselves to each other. And so, net, if you're doing the same things that you were doing to monetize your websites, let's say in 2022, 21, or previously, you're not really going to see growth this year in sort of the core unit metrics like CPM. So really what's going on, in my opinion, is the buy side is asking for some efficiency to come back to the auction from the sell side. A bunch of different things like auction duplication. So having the same SSP partner calling the same DSP partner 60, 70 times for the same opportunity. The buy side wants us to knock that off because from a cost perspective, they're just lighting money on fire at that point. And so, for publishers who are employing, let's call it older monetization strategies, they're going to see a slow continual decline. But for publishers in general who are really focused on the true value exchange with the advertisers, there's opportunity for large growth this year, particularly over last year. 2023 was fairly painful. If you adapt your strategy, it's not actually been that painful this year. If you're still using your old tricks, though, my guess is that your CPMs are quite a bit lower than last year even.
So it's really interesting, right? Go ahead, Ashley.
No, but I was just going to say, it kind of fits a broader theme that I think we'll talk about because, in discussing some of the topics that we were going to go through today, like this idea that we're finally at this point in the industry where we're being incentivized for doing the right things, I think is a really important thing. And it's great to see that finally start to come to fruition where actually focusing in on the premium supply and doing the right things and making sure that you're building towards those buyer outcomes is what's ultimately going to help publishers drive more revenue in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a theme that'll be coming up quite a bit. So if you're a publisher and you're aware of inefficiencies from SSPs, from DSPs, you're aware that DSPs are trying to access your inventory below the price points you're trying to set in the auction, what do you do? Like what strategies can a publisher employ to combat this?
I'm happy to jump on this one. I think, zooming out at a high level, anytime that you have a user coming to your web page, you're essentially introducing advertisers to that user through loading ads on the page. And if you zoom out and ask the question, is it reasonable to expect the advertiser can return their investment on buying the ad based on how you're injecting the ad, where you're injecting the ad, and also what your users are doing on the site? You will tend to have good outcomes if that's your North Star. You don't want to create those connections to each user if you know that there's no shot that an advertiser is going to return. So like a good way that I like to think about this is, let's say you have a blog about running, right? About track and field. And let's say on any given day, there are 2 users who visit your site who are in the market to buy a pair of running shoes. Well, if you only send 1 click to a shoe company like Nike or Adidas or whoever, then you've under monetized your visits on that page. But if you send 3 or 4 clicks to those shoe companies, and there's only 2 users inherently who are willing to buy shoes, you've degraded the value of their ad buys. So really thinking about sort of what the tactics and strategies are on your page in terms of when, where, and why you're placing the ads to maximize the relationship between that particular user and advertisements that they may see or advertisers they may get introduced to is ultimately going to be a winning strategy.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like trying to be really buttoned up in your flooring strategy, ensuring that like when you set a price floor, you're setting it across all partners equally, and you're not creating that like ability for a leakage or for buyers to find it cheaper through here versus another place. I think that's a hard thing to do, but I think that's actually a really important thing to do as well, because buyers are bidding below floors, particularly if you've got like direct integrations with them. You want to make sure that you've got these consistent floors in place so that you're upholding the value of your supply.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Ashley. I think, when I zoom out on floors specifically, flooring strategy is not really about maximizing the value on any particular impression. It's about training a vast number of algorithms around what the general value of your audience and users are. So it's not your goal with your flooring strategy should not be to eke out an extra 1 cent or 2 cent eCPM on any given impression. It should really be about right sizing the value exchange between the advertisers and you as a publisher. And so if you think about it that way, you're not trying to get advertisers to pay the highest possible price on any given impression. What you're trying to do is say, the inherent value of my users on display, let's say, is $3, but I'm getting bid back at $1. What is a flooring strategy and an inventory strategy I can do to try and bridge that gap between what I'm getting paid and what the inherent value is for for those users. And if you really step back, you're trying to do that across thousands of different algorithms. Like every DSP has a different bidding algorithm. And so when you're stepping back as a publisher and thinking about your flooring strategy, really what you want to be doing is twofold. You want to be thinking about your inventory quality for the advertisers. And then through flooring, how do you train the advertisers about the increased quality that they're getting? And they will come as you improve metrics for them.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
A really good way to capture that. That was well put at the end there. If you are feeding SSPs and DSPs what they want to eat, your inventory quality is clean, you can afford to use flooring tools as a mechanism to train algorithms.
Yep.
That's great. Okay. Topic number 2, cookie degradation. Excuse me. That was a tough one. From your perspective, Ashley, we'll start with you again. What trends are you seeing around cookie degradation this year, and what are publishers doing to combat it with Magnite?
Yeah, and degradation specifically different from deprecation, because now we're in this new world. They're not going away, but they are going to continue to degrade over time. And that's not any different from the trends that we've seen. We've already seen a huge degradation of cookies and addressability in the open internet. That's going to continue. It might have moments in time when it accelerates. I think we're all kind of still sitting and waiting to see how this all unfolds. But in general, what I've seen is when a request is not addressable, it mostly impacts fill. It's not so much like a CPM issue as it is just these aren't as valuable to buyers. They don't bid on them as much. We have certainly seen, as this degradation has happened over time, more and more publishers who are working with alternate ID partners. We've really seen a rise of alternate ID partners. It's been really interesting to watch, actually. Individual DSPs all have an alternate ID. And so I think we have for years kind of been testing to see which ones drive lift. I think we're starting to have a much better sense now of which ones of these IDs are actually valuable and which ones buyers and DSPs are listening to. I also think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think the focus on an authenticated user base is going to be critical. Like these are the truest alternate of a deterministic identifier that we're going to be able to find in a cookie-less or less cookie ecosystem. And so I think as publishers start to think about what their long-term strategy is, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all silver bullet. It's going to be a sort of mosaic approach where you're probably working across a bunch of different solutions because you want to be able to transact however your buyers want to transact with you. And so I do think sort of focusing on that authenticated user base is important. But then also I think as cookies degrade, there's going to be this opening for some of this more premium differentiated type of audiences, which are, first party data, contextual. If we can do that at scale, if we can do that in standardized ways, I think that adds a really nice solution to the portfolio of things that publishers and buyers can choose to transact with one another on. And so that's sort of what we're seeing. I think, obviously there's been a lot of change in this space even recently. And so I think as we sort of adjust to the changes and watch how this all unfolds, being nimble is certainly going to be important. But I also think it doesn't really change much because cookies are still going away and we are moving into this more privacy-centric world. And so we need to come up with these more privacy-centric solutions in order to transact with one another.
Right. Yeah. And you started off with IDs, and that's a very interesting one because essentially what we saw with Google's announcements throughout, especially early this year and late last year, was basically publishers scrambling to find what works in a world without third-party cookies. So that was, including us here at Playwire, we're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall through A/B testing and understanding what is working, what isn't working. Are there slices of inventory that are, a little bit better to put through an ID, and so on. But that was kind of the common theme I saw early this year. A lot of publishers scrambling, testing different ideas. We even saw some attempts at very early productization around solutions aimed to address this. But the reality is we never really saw the efficacy of those things. So, testing is really how we're looking at this as well.
Yeah, but testing is tricky. I mean, we've struggled with it on our end too. It's somewhat hard to separate one singular EID out from the rest of them and to understand which one of these is actually driving value. And so that's been a challenge. I mean, we're lucky that we've got some pretty good A/B testing tools, particularly through like our demand manager integrations, and we've been able to sort of narrow in on there. But like from a pub perspective, I can imagine like it's not just a straightforward way to understand which of these are valuable.
No, it is not easy. I think reporting on IDs, like unless you can construct your own config level split testing, getting actual information that's not your own is difficult to come by, honestly. Then you mentioned something else, right? So beyond IDs, there's this idea that third-party cookies are going away. How should publishers think about emphasis on this? I think in our case, we are aware of it and we're continuing testing personally, but it's not necessarily the fire that we're trying to jump on back in April, let's say.
Yeah.
So I still think it's worth the investment and for publishers to continue exploring other options.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like the issue of addressability is not going away. The landscape of it has changed a little bit, but the investments that you were making before should by and large still be the same. Like on our end, our focus on Magnite audiences, which are these standardized segments that we can deploy at scale and work with buyers through like curated packages to transact with pubs or with contextual. Like I think that's going to continue to be really important. And I think that's a point of differentiation and value. And to Myles's earlier point, like creating value and creating outcomes for buyers, right? Like this is an important thing that we can offer into the ecosystem that provide differentiated value and those outcomes. I think maybe as it relates to like some of the privacy sandbox work that we were all working on, I think we can take the gas off of that and see how that solution unfolds and evolves. Like certainly the timelines and the speed with which we needed to execute against something like that has eased. But even then, like if there's a viable solution that's going to help, again, with valuable data that will help buyers achieve outcomes that derives from that solution, I feel like we as an industry will be all in on supporting it. And I think at least from like the SSP perspective, it will always be a portfolio approach. Our job is to support all of the ways that buyers and sellers would want to work together. And so I do think having this sort of library of things that everybody can choose from in order to affect those best outcomes is what's going to be most important.
Yeah. And you mentioned curation too. So that is a trend I've seen really become popular in the last maybe 2 months. I think with Google's announcement initially, it's like, all right, how fast can we get our contextual product up? How fast can we scrape together demand and then sell it at scale? We jumped through a lot of hoops to get into position to have that set up. We didn't really see the dollars flowing through it early on. Now it seems like buyers are more leaning into this idea. Have you noticed that on the Magnite platform?
Oh yeah. And I think like, again, so we obviously have a huge team that's invested in sort of curating supply and working with our buyers, again, to achieve those outcomes to really, I think, as we were saying earlier, cut down on that noise. Curation has been a really effective tool to be able to target to certain publisher lists, to target to certain KPIs. It's actually been a really helpful, I think, benchmark for us to share with publishers. Like, this is what buyers are looking for, these types of KPIs, this viewability threshold. And it helps, I think, sort of set that standard that the industry then needs to get behind. And there's money behind it, which is the best part. Like, again, if you're able to create these packages that perform well and deliver on the value of the supply, like it's kind of a win for all parties. And so we have certainly seen a massive uptick in the curated deals that transact through Magnite, That's something that we are actively investing in. We've got a whole demand facilitation team. It's like 100 people who are working through that on the demand side. And then obviously on the supply side, we work very closely with our publishers to create that bridge and to make sure that we're informing our partners of what's important and what buyers are looking for and how we can continue to create value within the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's perfect. And you know what? I don't want to, at the risk of sounding like a Homer self-service here, on the platforms that do curate demand well, it can be pretty high. For example, we saw maybe curated PMPs go from about 9 to 10% of our total revenue when we were at low viewability times. After the efficiency initiatives, we saw sites reach 50% curated. And Magnite is one of the platforms where we see really strong curation. So I'm fully bought into that idea.
Yeah, it's also, go ahead, Myles.
It makes sense, right? Because it's one of the main tools that the buy side has to quickly and efficiently cut out noise, right? So if you have a group of, just use the sites example, if you have a group of 100 sites and you're not hitting your KPIs for the media buy, the easiest thing to do is to like cut out the handful of sites that are performing the lowest on that. And so when you think about, when you zoom out and look at the total open marketplace as a whole, the easiest mechanism that buyers currently have to expand what they're looking at, so to speak, is to pick a handful of publishing partners or a large handful of publishing partners and look at everything they have. Because the other option is to look at everything in the open market and throttle what they're looking at so they don't get drowned in the noise of low quality. So the buyers have a big incentive to use curated deals, right? And now that there's dollars behind it sort of in a more meaningful way than maybe a few years ago, it aligns the incentive on publishers to deliver the metrics with their advertising that those buyers are looking for. So it's a great tool that the buy side has to sort of hold the publishing side accountable to making the value exchange beneficial for buyers.
I also think, transacting these curated deals at the end of the day, they're deal ID based transactions. They're auction packages. They're different than like your typical like pub managed deals, but they also give buyers a mechanism to control and direct spend a little bit better. Like I think open market, you sort of work with the DSP algorithms and what those algos are tied to. But within this space, as a buyer, you can actually leverage your weight a little bit more. You can cut more strategic deals. You can lean in more heavily with partners that deliver value. And then this gives them a mechanism to be able to direct that spend. So if there are spend thresholds tied to certain deals, like it's easier to achieve that. It's easier to track that. And so I think we're seeing a bunch of different trends that are driving into this broader one, which is curation. But like there's a lot of different reasons right now why these are really beneficial tools in our ecosystem. And we've seen it accelerate a ton this year, and I can only imagine that trend's going to continue.
And also a quick reminder, if you are a publisher, now is a really good time to make sure your signal fidelity is in order. Your signals are healthy, they're being passed and ingested correctly by SSPs. Very important. But Ashley, just to put a cap on your last point there, I mean, this is the second topic we've talked about where efficiency and clearing out noise is becoming very important.
Yeah.
The deal ID based transactions is a very, what's the right word, romantic way to purchase inventory. It kind of skirts outside of the noise that elsewhere exists.
Yeah, and I think it speaks maybe to a broader trend of consolidation. Like as we think about some of the inefficiency that's in the ecosystem, and it's not just buyers who are looking to cut down on that noise. Like I'm sure as a partner, you're looking, or as a publisher, you're looking to lean in more heavily with a few strategic partners. From like the DSP side, they're looking at specific publisher lists now. They're, direct integrations, I think, is a mechanism for consolidation. And I think we're seeing this in a bunch of different areas of the business, and it all plays out in different ways. But I think speaks to the same trend. 5-6 years ago, header bidding came onto the scene, and all of a sudden we see this absolute inundation of supply, and we've seen a lot of it sort of proliferate since then. And now we're sort of coming full circle where it's okay. These are the partners that add value. This is how they can add value, and these are really where I want to direct my dollars, or where I want to like lean in heavily in that partnership. And I think that's what we're starting to see play out, which is, quite frankly, again, I think a healthy thing for our industry. Like, we're finally being incentivized to do the right thing, which is a great place to be in.
I can say that this year, publishers are actually getting rewarded for having desirable behavior, more so than ever. At least that's being felt in the numbers. But you did mention consolidation. The 6-month initiative that we took to clean our inventory also had implications for demand too. Earlier days, let's say five years ago, theoretically, you could add a new SSP, and that SSP might be 1% incremental, 1%. You could end up adding 100 SSPs and getting 100, single points of incremental revenue, but at what cost? And I think that's what we started listening to this year. Like, what implications exist if you run 30 SSPs in your pre-bid stack? It's not good. You're duplicating bids to DSPs that have QPS limits. You're costing compute money to process the bid requests. So that's, one of the things that we did last year was we cut 40% of our SSPs.
Did you see a major hit to revenue in doing so?
That was the fear. I want to say the number ended up being minus 1% revenue.
I mean, that's crazy.
In the short term, it was 1% down.
In the short term, right?
And totally. And then those long-term trends, and it really is like, I think we were talking about like flooring strategy, like you're training things over time. Like it absolute same thing here. Like, it takes weeks, months for DSP algorithms to really like hone in and hit a sweet spot once you make a change that drastic. And so again, I think it's like, as we consolidate, as we start to do more of the right things, you're rewarded for it. And then that just goes and it helps to fight against some of the other trends, like CPM degradation, right? Like, if there's less noise and then what you're presenting to the market is more valuable, your CPMs will be more resilient as a result.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the interesting things that's come out of, I have a bunch of thoughts on consolidation, but I'll start here. It's been one of the interesting things that's come out of the initiative is looking at typical seasonal patterns and how, our predictions on demand falling off, when that typically happens. So let's take like end of month, end of quarter, for example. So it used to be, 10 years ago, your demand fell off half a day before the month ended or half a day before the quarter ended. And then you zoom out to 2023 and your demand is shrinking away like a day and a half, sometimes 2 days before the month ends and the quarter ends. And that's just, that's a direct result of the glut of waste spending the money before the IO is over, technically, right? And one of the things that we've noticed as we went through our efficiency initiative, which internally we call QPT, is that our CPMs and our seasonal patterns are much more resilient up to the changeover point. So we see stronger performance than we did last year on the last 2 days of the month. And the drops that we get when a quarter turns over or when traffic surges around a holiday or dies around a holiday, a lot of those things are ending up much more resilient. And the theory around that is that we've reached a better equilibrium on displaying true value of a user to advertisers who actually want to buy that specific user. And so there's less of a reason for those budgets to pull back or not start as quickly on the change of a quarter or change of a month. So yeah, the consolidation piece, just to move on to that, is fairly interesting. I think, most most industries consolidate over time as waste and, for lack of a better term, like arbitrage opportunities dry up as an industry matures. And so from a consolidation standpoint, there are some significant challenges that, a lot of them are self-created from publishers, but just exist in the industry. So, a good example of this is it's fairly expensive on a unit economics term to like listen for an ad opportunity and then try and win it, right? So if you're going to try and win that opportunity as a bidder, you're competing against thousands, millions of advertisers and campaigns and line items via, thousands of DSPs. And if you're a publisher, every publisher is unique and every publisher is special, but also there's like millions of publishers out there. So there's literally tens of millions of opportunities to buy an ad every second. And most DSPs outside of a handful just cannot physically listen to that at any given time. So, we chatted about this earlier, but it's a very simple, like dogs at a water bowl analogy, right? Your water bowl is finite. Everyone's trying to drink water out of it. If you are a big, healthy, likable, strong dog, you're going to have a seat at that water bowl. And if you're loud, obnoxious, don't provide value, don't return any benefit to the pack, you're not going to have a seat at that water bowl, right? And so, what does this mean for publishers? Let's say you're a publisher that's a small, medium, or even large size publisher. To some degree, there's a limit to how big you can be as a single publisher. So if you were to, let's say, pool your resources with a bunch of other like-minded publishers, all of a sudden you're a big dog at that dog bowl, and all of the DSPs are like more incentivized to listen to you because they can get more of their water through to you. You have a bigger mouth, you have a seat at the table, you're not fighting for scraps. And so, as time goes on, we'll see continued consolidation. The flavor that it's taking right now, and hopefully this doesn't sound too self-serving, is with sales houses. So if you're a sales house like Playwire, your seat at the dog bowl by definition is bigger than even most like premium publishers that are out there, just from a scale of requests, scale of quality requests. We're going to be larger because at the end of the day, we are an aggregator. And so aligning yourself with an aggregator can be a very good shortcut for publishers to get a better seat at the dog bowl, to get better demand, fresher water, so to speak. And so I think, as time goes on, we'll just continue seeing consolidation, and consolidation ultimately is like scary, but on the publisher side, it is going to reward publishers who make sure they're doing things above board and in accordance with what advertisers want, because the advertisers ultimately are the ones filling the bowl and deciding which dogs get to drink and which dogs don't get to drink. So aligning yourself with sort of the biggest dog that is returning what the advertisers want is going to be a very solid long-term strategy. Oh, Ashley, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, particularly as some of these solutions that you really do need to employ get more and more technically complex. Like we've talked about a whole range of different things, flooring strategies, audience strategies, like there's a lot, and some of it is fairly technical. And so it does, I think, make a lot of sense as this ecosystem consolidates, as there is this focus on, leaning in more heavily with fewer partners and fewer partners who are doing things right. I think 100% that consolidation, even within the publisher landscape, is something that we're seeing a bigger and bigger trend. And it is something that I think is very helpful, particularly for like mid to long tail pubs, to be able to have that strength in numbers to come to the table with full scale, with premium supply. Like I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if an advertiser has $1 to bid and you improve their efficiency, they're not going to not spend the whole dollar. It's not like you create more efficiency and they're like, oh, I only want to advertise with 80 cents now. They want to spend the full dollar. That's what their marketing budgets allow. And so as you as consolidation happens, if you take an approach to consolidate around efficiency, your share of that single dollar will go up, because the advertisers aren't going to pull change out of that dollar just because efficiency comes. In fact, if you actually create a lot more efficiency, they might turn around tomorrow and decide to spend $2 instead of $1. And so really sort of how the industry is consolidating on the publisher side, how it's consolidating on the sales house, SSP, and DSP side is still very much in line with this idea that the demand side is asking for some efficiency back, and they're very willing to pay for it when they see it.
Yeah. The theme remains the same. Like you're incentivized to do the right thing, which is, I think, a great spot for our industry to be in.
I think it's a good way to explain to a publisher that might be scared of consolidation that it doesn't have to be scary. If you have deep relationships and you're focused on the challenge of how do I get more with less, then you'll do fine. All right. Ashley, I wanted to come back to one topic, which is basically the increase in deal ID transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So we spoke a little bit about curation. What are you seeing at Magnite? Like, what's driving this?
Just
the shift away from open market spend into more deal ID spend.
Yeah, no, I think I think we touched on it a little bit, right? It's just this ability to really have these targeted publisher lists and to be able to overlay like valuable KPIs on top of them to cut through the noise, to be able to layer on things that do provide unique and differentiated value, like audiences and contextualization. And then again, to be able to channel spend and actually control where budgets go so that you can create these sort of stronger, more leaned in partnerships and really like drive value just from the fact that you're working with fewer.
All right. Well, I think we have taken up too much time. But Ashley, Myles, always great speaking with you both. Hope to do this again, actually.
Yeah, no, this was great. Thank you guys all so much.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Great.
Bye.